The planet Prime had two suns. Both of them were angry. They hung in the orange sky like twin eyes of fire, burning everything below with heat that could cook meat in minutes. The sand was red, the rocks were red, and even the air seemed to glow red when the wind picked up. Nothing soft survived here. Nothing weak lasted long. This was why the Galactic Federation chose it for their survival trials. Every 10 cycles, species from across the known galaxy sent their strongest, their toughest, their most adaptable members to compete. The prize was simple but precious: a seat on the High Council, the ruling body that made laws for 1,000 worlds. For young species still trying to prove themselves, this was the fastest path to respect and power. Humanity had been part of the Federation for only 30 cycles. They were considered children by the older races, amusing, fragile, interesting to watch perhaps, but not to be taken seriously. When the lottery selected a human to participate in this cycle's trials, most of the galaxy laughed. Did not laugh. She stood in the preparation chamber of the orbital station, looking down at Prime through a thick window, and felt her stomach turn cold. She was not a soldier. She was not an explorer. She was a botanist, a scientist who studied plants. She had spent her life in greenhouses and laboratories, not deserts and war zones. "You can still refuse," said Ambassador. He stood beside her, his hands folded behind his back. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. 20 years of representing humanity to aliens who saw his species as pets had worn him down. The Federation allows candidates to withdraw before the trial begins. There is no shame in it. Watched a sandstorm move across the planet's surface. From up here it looked small, beautiful even, like orange silk flowing over glass. "How many humans have competed before?" she asked. "None." "And if I refuse?" Was quiet for a moment. "Then we wait another 10 cycles for the lottery to choose someone else, and the other species continue to see us as cowards who talk big but run when things get difficult." Nodded slowly. She understood. This was not really about her. It was about all of humanity, every human on every colony world, every child who would grow up in a galaxy that either respected their species or treated them like clever animals. "What are my chances?" she asked. "The survival rate for the trials is 27%, said, but that number includes species with natural adaptations for extreme environments, for a human with no special abilities." He did not finish the sentence. "So I will probably die." "Yes." Turned away from the window. Her reflection stared back at her, a small woman with black hair tied back, wearing the simple gray uniform of a Federation candidate. She did not look like a warrior. She did not look like a survivor. She looked like exactly what she was, a scientist who had been in the wrong place when the lottery machine picked her name. "Tell me about the other candidates," she said. Pulled out a small tablet and began reading. There are 12 candidates this cycle. The favorites are commander of the He is 3 meters tall, has skin like stone, and has survived 6 combat deployments. Then there is a crystalline named, whose body can reflect heat and resist abrasion. They have sent a soldier named, who wears natural armor that can stop bullets. And the others? Similar. The sent a burrower named, his species can dig through solid rock and survive underground for weeks without food. They have a candidate who can store water in her body like a camel. "I understand," said. "They all have something, some natural gift that helps them survive." "Yes. And I have nothing." Put the tablet away. He looked at her with something that might have been pity or might have been respect. It was hard to tell. "You have a human brain," he said. "That has to count for something." The preparation ceremony was held in the station's great hall. All 12 candidates stood in a line while Director Bora, a tall female with blue skin and 4 arms, explained the rules. The rules were simple because the trial was simple. Survive for 3 days on the surface of Prime. No technology, no weapons, no shelter materials, no help from above. The storm season has begun, Director Bora announced. Our weather predictors say this will be the worst tempest in 40 cycles. Wind speeds will reach 300 kilometers per hour. Sand will strip flesh from bone. Temperature will swing from boiling heat to freezing cold. She paused, letting her words sink in. Many of you will die. This is expected. This is acceptable. The Federation does not want members who cannot face death and survive. We want the strong, the adaptable, the worthy. Felt the other candidates looking at her. She did not need to turn her head to know what they were thinking. The commander with his stone skin and warrior scars. The crystalline whose body sparkled like a living diamond. The soldier whose armored plates clicked softly as he breathed. They were all wondering the same thing. Why was this soft little human here? What could she possibly hope to achieve? She wondered the same thing herself. The transport ship carried them down through the atmosphere. Sat strapped into her seat, watching the window turn from black to orange to red as they descended. The heat began to seep through the hull, making the air inside thick and heavy. By the time they landed, she was already sweating. The door opened. A wall of heat hit her like a physical force. Stepped out onto the red sand of Prime. The two suns blazed overhead. The horizon shimmered with heat waves. In the distance, she could see massive shapes rising from the desert, strange plants with thick bodies and long spines. She remembered from her briefing, toxic, dangerous, to be avoided. Around her, the other candidates were already moving. The commander strode off toward a rocky outcrop. The burrower was digging into the sand with incredible speed. The others scattered in different directions, each following their own survival instincts. Stood alone, feeling the heat press down on her like a weight. She had 3 days to survive. She had no claws, no armor, no ability to burrow or store water or reflect heat. But she had eyes, and she had a brain, and right now both of them were focused on those distant. She began to walk. The first day was about learning. Walked slowly across the red desert, conserving her energy and watching everything. She watched how the sand moved in the wind. She watched how the shadows fell between the rocks. She watched the most of all. The massive plants grew in clusters across the desert floor. They stood between 5 and 10 meters tall, their thick bodies covered in long black spines that glistened with poison. The other candidates gave them a wide space. The briefing materials had been clear. Touching a meant death. The poison would stop your heart in seconds. But was a botanist. She had spent her entire adult life studying plants, and she knew something that the briefing materials did not mention. Plants were not evil. They did not want to kill. They only wanted to survive, just like everything else. She found a spot behind a large rock, close enough to observe a cluster of but far enough to be safe. Then she sat down and watched. For 6 hours, she did nothing but watch. She noticed that the spines were not always extended. During the hottest part of the day, when both suns were directly overhead, the spines pulled back slightly. The plant was conserving water, she realized, keeping its defensive systems on standby to save energy. She noticed that this body was not solid. It swelled and contracted slightly, like breathing. The outer shell was hard, but beneath it she could see softer tissue. Membrane, living material that could be cut. She noticed that small insects crawled in and out of tiny holes near the base of the plants. If insects could survive inside, then the interior must be safe, must be livable. By the time the suns began to set, had a plan. Up in the orbital station, Lieutenant was watching the monitoring screens with growing worry. The young officer had been assigned to track the human candidate, a job no one else wanted. Everyone assumed the human would die quickly, and no one wanted to watch it happen. But the human was not dying. She was just sitting behind a rock, staring at plants. "What is she doing?" asked the representative. She had come to the monitoring room to watch her own candidate, Commander, but found herself drawn to the strange behavior of the human. "I do not know," admitted. "She has not moved in hours." Perhaps she has given up. Perhaps she is waiting to die. Perhaps, but did not think so. There was something in the way the human held herself, something focused, alert. She was not waiting to die, she was waiting for something else. The night came fast on Prime. The two suns dropped below the horizon within minutes of each other, and suddenly the burning heat was replaced by bitter cold. The temperature fell so quickly that frost began to form on the rocks. This was when the first candidates began to fail. Despite her water storage ability, could not handle the rapid temperature change. Her body went into shock. The rescue team pulled her out before she died, but she was finished. The crystalline name discovered that cold made her body brittle. A fall against a rock cracked her arm, and she had to call for extraction. Survived the night by burying herself in sand. It was an old human trick, something desert peoples on Earth had done for thousands of years. The sand held heat from the day, creating a warm pocket that protected against the freezing air above. She slept badly, shivering and uncomfortable, but she slept. When the suns rose again, she continued her observation of the. By midday on the second day, she had learned everything she needed to know. The plants were hollow inside. They stored water in their cores. Their spines retracted during rest periods. Their outer membrane could be cut during these rest periods without triggering the poison defense. Most importantly, she had learned that the interior of it was large enough for a human body. The sky began to change color around noon. The orange turned darker, becoming the color of dried blood. The wind picked up, carrying sand that stung her skin like tiny needles. Looked toward the horizon and saw it, a wall of darkness stretching from ground to sky, moving toward her with terrible speed. The sandstorm had arrived. In the orbital station, alarms began to sound. Director Bora rushed to the monitoring room, her 4 arms moving rapidly across control panels. All candidates, emergency warning, she broadcast. Category 5 sandstorm approaching. Estimated wind speed, 340 kilometers per hour. Sand density, lethal. Seek shelter immediately. But there was no shelter on Prime. That was the point of the trial. The commander tried to hide behind a rock formation. The wind found him anyway, ripping away his stone-like skin layer by layer. His emergency beacon activated, and the rescue team barely reached him in time. 2 of the soldiers were not so lucky. Their armor held against the sand, but the wind picked them up and threw them against rocks with bone-breaking force. One by one, the emergency beacons activated. One by one, the candidates were pulled from the surface, broken and bleeding and defeated. Watched the human signal on her screen. The dot had been stationary for several hours, positioned near a cluster of. Now, as the storm approached, it finally moved. She is going toward the plants, said confused. That is suicide. Shook her head. Humans, they panic at the end, they make foolish choices. It is sad but expected. The storm hit the cluster with full force. The monitoring drones lost visual contact. The signal trackers could barely penetrate the interference from all the sand and wind. For a long moment, the human's dot flickered and jumped across the screen. Then it went still. She is gone, said. A pity. She lasted longer than I expected. But was not so sure. The signal was still active. Weak but active, the human was not dead. Not yet. What is she doing in there? Whispered to herself. Inside could hear the storm raging outside. It sounded like 1,000 voices screaming in anger, demanding to be let in. The plant's thick walls shook and trembled, but they held. The spines had extended fully, locking together to form a protective shell that deflected the worst of the wind. She had done it. She had cut through the membrane during the plant's rest period, hollowed out enough space for her body, and climbed inside just as the storm arrived. This natural healing had sealed the wound behind her, trapping her in a cocoon of living plant matter. It was dark inside, dark and warm and humid. Water dripped from the walls, clean water, filtered by the plant's natural systems. The air was thick but breathable. She was surrounded by soft, pulpy material that cushioned her body against the shaking. For the first time since arriving on Prime, smiled. She curled up in the darkness, closed her eyes, and let the storm sing her to sleep. The storm lasted for 36 hours. In the orbital station, no one slept. Director Bora had called in extra staff to monitor the situation. Medical teams stood ready to receive survivors. Body recovery units waited in the hangar bays. The mood was grim and quiet, like a hospital waiting room where everyone knew the patient was dying. Of the 12 candidates who had started the trial, 9 had already been extracted. 3 were dead. 4 were badly injured. 2 had survived with minor wounds but had failed the trial by calling for help. Only 3 signals remained active on the surface. The burrower, who had dug deep underground before the storm hit, a candidate whose status was unclear, and the human. The human signal has not moved in 20 hours, reported a technician. She is dead, said. They are toxic. Even if the storm did not kill her, the poison would have. Ambassador stood in the corner of the monitoring room, saying nothing. He had been there since the storm began, watching the screens, hoping for a miracle he did not believe in. His face showed nothing, but his hands were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Lieutenant stared at the human signal dot. It was weak but steady, not flickering, not fading, just sitting there in the middle of a cluster, refusing to disappear. The poison kills in seconds, said slowly. If she touched the spines, she would be dead already. Her signal would have stopped. Then the sand killed her, said, or the heat, or the cold. There are many ways to die on Prime. But her signal is still active. Signals can remain active after death. The tracking device is built to survive extreme conditions. Shook her head. Something did not feel right. She pulled up the human's movement data from before the storm. The pattern was strange. The human had spent hours near the, not moving, just watching. Then, right before the storm hit, she had moved directly toward the plants. Not away from them, toward them. She went to the on purpose, said. She was studying them, planning something. Made a sound of disgust. You are imagining things. Humans are not clever enough for plans. They are reactive creatures, emotional, impulsive. They do not think ahead. But had heard what said. He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the screen. What was her profession, he asked, before she was selected for the trial. Checked the file. Botanist. She studied plants. The room went quiet. Inside dreamed of home. She dreamed of her grandmother's garden inn, where she had spent her childhood summers. She dreamed of helping her grandmother plant vegetables and pull weeds. She dreamed of sitting under the old persimmon tree, eating fruit and listening to stories. Her grandmother had been a farmer, a simple woman who had never traveled more than 50 kilometers from the village where she was born. But she had known things, secret things about plants and soil and weather that no university could teach. Plants are not your enemy, her grandmother used to say. They are not your friend either. They are just trying to live like you. If you understand what they want, you can work with them. If you fight against them, you will always lose. Had remembered those words when she first saw the. Everyone else saw a deadly obstacle, something to avoid and fear. She saw a plant, a living thing with needs and behaviors and patterns. The needed to protect itself from the desert. It grew thick walls to hold water. It developed spines to keep animals away. It sealed wounds quickly to prevent moisture loss. Everything it did was about survival. But survival worked both ways. The plant's defenses could protect other things too, if you knew how to use them. Woke to silence. The screaming wind was gone. The shaking had stopped. The walls of her living shelter were still and calm. She lay in the darkness for a long moment, listening to her own heartbeat, feeling the dampness of the plant matter against her skin. She was alive. More than alive, she was comfortable. The had kept her warm through the freezing night hours and cool through the burning day. The water dripping from the walls had kept her hydrated. She had slept better inside this alien plant than she had in her bed on the orbital station. Her grandmother would have laughed. Began to move, testing her limbs. Everything worked. No frostbite, no heat stroke, no injuries from the storm. The only problem was getting out. She felt along the walls of her chamber until she found the spot where she had entered. The plant had sealed the wound completely, growing new tissue over the cut. It was thicker now, harder than before. The had healed itself. Pulled out the sharp rock she had kept in her pocket, the same rock she had used to cut her way in. She began to carve at the healed tissue, working slowly and carefully. The plant did not react. Its spines were retracted now, resting after the stress of the storm. It did not see her as a threat. It took 2 hours to cut her way out. When she finally pushed through the last layer of membrane and felt fresh air on her face, she nearly cried with relief. The desert had changed. The storm had stripped away the top layer of sand, revealing dark rock beneath. The landscape looked different, smoother, like it had been polished by a giant hand. Many of the smaller had been destroyed, their bodies torn apart by the wind. But the larger ones had survived, standing proud and tall against the orange sky. Climbed out of her shelter and stood in the sunlight. Her body was covered in plant sap and her clothes were ruined, but she was alive. She was alive, and the trial was almost over. In the orbital station, the monitoring room erupted in chaos. "Movement," shouted the technician. "The human signal is moving." Leaned forward, her eyes wide. On the screen, the dot that had been still for so long was now active, pulsing with strong, steady life signs. "That is impossible," said. "No one survives inside." "She did," said quietly. His voice was calm, but his eyes were shining with something that looked like tears. "She survived." Director Bora was already calling for a visual drone. Seconds later, the screen filled with an image that would spread across the galaxy within hours. A small human woman, covered in green sap, climbing out of a hole in the side of a massive alien plant. She looked up at the drone and waved. "Is there breakfast?" Her voice came through the communication channel. "I am really hungry." In the monitoring room, no one laughed. No one spoke. They just stared at the screen, watching the impossible happen. The human had done what no one else could do. She had turned a death trap into a home. She had made the desert work for her instead of against her. And she had done it by taking a nap. The rescue skimmer touched down 50 meters from its position. The pilot, a young Korean man named, stepped out with a medical kit in one hand and a flask of rice wine in the other. Ambassador had asked him to bring the wine, just in case. No one had expected it to be needed. Stopped walking when he got close enough to see clearly. The human woman was sitting on a rock, picking dried plant sap off her arms and looking annoyed about it. Behind her, the massive stood with a hole in its side, leaking green fluid like a wounded animal. "You were inside that thing," said. It was not a question. Looked up at him and shrugged. It was the only shelter available. "It is poisonous. One touch kills you." "The poison is in the spines. The inside is safe." She held up her sap-covered hands, messy but safe. Stood there for a long moment, trying to understand what he was seeing. He had been a rescue pilot for 8 years. He had pulled dying candidates from every kind of disaster. He had seen strong warriors reduced to crying wrecks by the trials of Prime. But he had never seen anything like this. A human woman who had survived a Category 5 sandstorm by taking a nap inside a deadly plant. "I brought wine," he finally said. "The ambassador thought you might want something to drink." His face lit up. "Is it the good kind?" "It is rice wine from Earth." "Then yes, I very much want something to drink." They sat together on the rocks while drank the wine and told her story. She explained about watching about learning their patterns, about recognizing that they were just plants doing plant things. She explained how she had cut through the membrane during the rest period, how the plant had sealed itself around her, how she had slept through the worst storm in decades while everyone else was being torn apart. Listened without interrupting. When she was finished, he shook his head slowly. "The other species will not believe it," he said. "They think humans are weak, fragile. They think we survive by accident, not by planning." "Then they do not understand humans very well," said. The official end of the trial came 6 hours later. Of the 12 candidates who had started, only 2 had completed the full 3 days without calling for rescue, and the burrower named had survived by doing what his species did best, digging. He had created a tunnel system 3 meters below the surface, where the temperature was stable and the sand could not reach. It was impressive, but it was expected. They were born to burrow. Every member of their species could do what had done. What had done was different. She had no natural ability to survive in the desert. Her species had evolved on a planet with forests and rivers and gentle weather. Nothing about her body was designed for prime. But her brain was designed for solving problems, and that, it turned out, was enough. The award ceremony was held on the orbital station. Both survivors stood before Director Bora while the other candidates, the ones who had failed, watched from medical beds and recovery rooms. 2 survivors, Director Bora announced. The best result in 30 cycles. Both of you have earned the survivor's crest and the right to speak for your species in the council chambers. She presented the first crest too. The burrower accepted it with calm dignity. He had expected to survive. His people had been winning survival trials for centuries. Then Director Bora turned too. "In all my years overseeing these trials," she said, "I have never seen anything like what you did. You had no natural advantages, no special abilities. By all logic, you should have been the first to die." "I know," said. "Instead, you found a way to turn our deadliest plant into a shelter. You used knowledge instead of strength, planning instead of power." Director Bora paused, her 4 arms held still at her sides. "I must ask, did you know it would work? When you cut into that, were you certain you would survive?" Thought about the question for a long moment. "No," she admitted. "I was not certain, but I was more certain about the plant than I was about the storm. The storm was chaos, random, uncontrollable. The plant was a living thing with patterns I could understand. I chose to trust the thing I understood." The burrower stepped forward. He was a small creature covered in brown fur, with large digging claws and black eyes that reflected the light. He had been watching since the ceremony began, and now he performed a gesture that made everyone in the room go silent. He touched his claws to the ground, then raised them to his chest. It was the sign of deepest respect, usually reserved for elders and heroes. "My people burrow because we must," said. "It is in our blood, in our bones, in every part of our being. We cannot choose not to burrow any more than we can choose not to breathe." He turned to look at directly. "You burrowed because you chose to. You looked at something that was not made for you, something that should have killed you, and you decided to make it yours. That is not survival, that is conquest." The room was silent. The injured candidates in their beds, the officials at their stations, the ambassadors in their formal clothes, all of them were staring at the small human woman who had done the impossible. Did not know what to say. She was not used to being looked at like this. She was a botanist, not a hero. She had just done what made sense. But maybe that was the point. Maybe doing what made sense, when everyone else was panicking, was exactly what made humans special. Director Bora presented the survivor's crest too. It was a small disc made of metal from Prime itself, red as the sand and hot to the touch. Held it in her palm and felt its weight. "The Federation will be watching humanity more closely now," Director Bora said. "What you did here today has changed things. I do not know if that is good or bad, but it is definitely interesting." looked down at the crest, then back up at Director Bora. "For humans," she said, "interesting is usually good." Later that night, after the ceremonies were finished and the other species had returned to their ships, stood alone in the observation deck. She looked down at Prime, at the red desert that had tried to kill her, at the distant shapes of the that had saved her life. She thought about her grandmother again, about the Garden Inn, about all the lessons she had learned without realizing she was learning them. "Thank you," she whispered to no one in particular. "Thank you for teaching me to see." Below her, the two suns of Prime began to set. The sky turned from orange to purple to black, and somewhere in the desert, a wounded continued to heal itself, unaware that it had just changed the course of galactic history. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within hours of the trial's end, every major news network was carrying the story. "Human survives Prime by sleeping inside deadly plant." The headlines made it sound simple, almost funny. But the people who watched the footage, the actual recording of a small human woman climbing out of a while covered in green sap, did not laugh. They were too busy being terrified. On a dozen different worlds, military leaders gathered in secure rooms to discuss what this meant. The humans had always been seen as weak. Their bodies were soft. They were short. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. The older species had tolerated them because they seemed harmless. But harmless creatures did not survive Prime. Harmless creatures did not look at a poisonous plant and think, "I could live inside that." Harmless creatures did not sleep through storms that killed warriors and soldiers and champions. "What else can they do?" asked the general during one such meeting. "What else have we missed?" No one had an answer. 3 weeks after the trial, the Galactic Federation held a formal ceremony on their flagship, the Eternal Harmony. Representatives from all member species attended. It was the largest gathering of alien diplomats in a decade. Stood at the center of the Great Hall, wearing a simple black dress that Ambassador had chosen for her. She felt uncomfortable with all the eyes on her. Hundreds of aliens, some friendly, some hostile, some simply curious. She wished she was back in her laboratory, looking at plant samples under a microscope. High Chancellor approached her. He was ancient, even by the long-lived standards of his species. His skin was pale blue, wrinkled like old paper. He moved slowly, supported by a floating chair, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Of Earth," he said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "You have completed the trial of Prime. You have earned the survivor's crest. By the laws of the Federation, you are entitled to speak." He gestured toward a raised platform where a single chair waited, the speaker's chair. Only those who had proven themselves worthy were allowed to sit there. "Before you take your place," Chancellor continued, "I must ask you a question, one that the entire Federation wishes to understand." Nodded, "Ask." "We have studied your species for decades. We know your biology, your history, your technology. By every measure we use, you should not be dangerous. You should not be threatening. You are small and soft and short-lived." The Chancellor paused. "Yet you did something on Prime that none of our strongest warriors could do. How?" Thought about the question. She could give a technical answer about plant biology and survival strategies. She could talk about her grandmother's garden and the lessons she had learned there. But she did not think that was what the Chancellor really wanted to know. "On Earth," she said slowly, "there is a saying, 'Necessity is the mother of invention.' It means that when we need something badly enough, we find a way to create it." She looked around the Great Hall, meeting the eyes of aliens who had dismissed her species as inferior. "Humans have always been weak," she continued. "We know this. We have always known this. When our ancestors lived on the grasslands of Africa, they were surrounded by animals that were stronger, faster, and more deadly than they were. They should have died. They should have been eaten by lions and trampled by elephants and starved during droughts. But they did not die. No, they did not die, Because when a human cannot beat a lion in a fight, they do not give up. They make a spear. When they cannot run faster than a deer, they make a trap. When they cannot survive a drought, they store food and dig wells and move to places with more water. She pointed toward the great window, toward the stars that filled the darkness of space. Every challenge makes us more creative. Every limitation pushes us to think harder. Every time someone tells us we cannot do something, we ask ourselves, what if we did it anyway? The hall was completely silent. Even the aliens who had hated humans, who had wanted them to fail, were listening. On Prime said, I had no natural advantages. I could not survive the storm with my body alone, so I used my mind instead. I looked at my surroundings and asked, what can I use? What can I change? What can I make work for me instead of against me? There was not meant to be shelter, but I made it shelter anyway, because that is what humans do. We take what exists and we make it into what we need. Chancellor was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, a slow and careful expression that transformed his ancient face. I have lived for 700 years, he said. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched species grow powerful and then destroy themselves. In all that time, I have learned one truth. The galaxy does not belong to the strongest. It belongs to the most adaptable. He gestured toward the speaker's chair. Of Earth, your species has proven itself worthy. Take your seat among the stars. Walked to the platform and sat down. The chair was too big for her, designed for larger species. She looked small and out of place, like a child sitting at an adult's table. But when she spoke, her voice filled the hall. On behalf of humanity, I accept this honor. We look forward to working with the Federation as equals. And we promise you this. Whatever challenges the galaxy faces, whatever problems seem impossible to solve, we will find a way. She smiled, remembering the storm, remembering the nap that had changed everything. We always find a way. The ceremony ended with a feast that lasted for hours. Alien foods from a dozen worlds, music from 100 cultures, conversations in languages that could not understand. She moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and answering questions, trying to be polite when she really just wanted to go home. Eventually, she found a quiet corner and escaped there with a glass of something that might have been wine. Ambassador found her a few minutes later. You did well, he said. That speech will be studied for generations. We take what exists and we make it into what we need. Very powerful. Shrugged, I just told the truth. Sometimes the truth is powerful. Looked out at the stars. The Council has already voted to approve full membership for humanity. The process usually takes decades. They completed it in one afternoon. That is good news. It is, but it also means more responsibility, more expectations. The galaxy is watching us now. They expect us to be remarkable. Finished her wine and set the glass aside. Then we will have to be remarkable, she said. Or at least we will have to look like we are, which is often the same thing. Laughed. It was the first time she had seen him laugh since they met. You know, he said, when you were selected for the trial, I thought it was a death sentence. I thought I was sending a good person to die for nothing. You were probably right to think that. But now I realize something. The lottery did not choose you by accident. It chose you because you were exactly what we needed. Not a warrior, not a champion, just a scientist who knew how to look at problems differently. Thought about that. She thought about all the other humans who could have been chosen. Soldiers, athletes, survival experts. Any of them might have tried to fight the desert to overcome it with strength and endurance, and any of them might have died. But she had not tried to fight. She had tried to understand, and understanding had saved her. Maybe that is humanity's real gift, she said. Not strength, not speed, not any special ability, just the willingness to look at things differently, to ask questions no one else is asking, to find solutions no one else is looking for. Ambassador nodded slowly. If that is true, he said, then the galaxy should be very worried, because humans never stop asking questions. Smiled. Outside the window, the stars sparkled like diamonds scattered across black cloth. Somewhere out there, millions of aliens were reading about her story, thinking about what it meant, wondering what humans might do next. She did not know what the future would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever challenges came, whatever impossible situations arose, humanity would face them the same way she had faced the storm. Not with strength, not with fear, but with creativity, adaptability, and the stubborn refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. And maybe, when things got really bad, with a nice long nap.